Hello everyone and welcome to Hill Street. Today's story is Invasion of the Hushmen by Bob Ruhr. If you end up enjoying this story, please leave a like. And if you enjoy hearing stories from me, please subscribe and become a resident of Hill Street and let me know how I'm doing in the comments. Now, let's get to this nightmare. They all moved in at once, and they all wore red. Nobody knew where they came from. My wife and I thought they were Amish at first, but after a few months, they morphed into something we could not and did not understand. We called them Hushmen. We lived in Dupree, South Dakota, just a couple hours north of Rapid City. When you picture South Dakota in your head, it's probably pretty close to what it actually was. Mountainous, green, but stretched and isolated. We had a poor excuse for a town. Everyone kept to themselves. I barely knew my neighbors. I always believed the door-to-door distance accounted for some of the seclusion. We were separated by tens of acres. Despite this, the efforts to build a sense of community seemed non-existent. My name is Paul Harmon. I was a wheat farmer. When I told folks back home, they would always giggle. They laughed because I didn't look like a wheat farmer. I looked like someone who sold insurance. I liked to dress sharp. I was the opposite of the farmer caricature. No overalls, no straw hat. Presentation was important to me and my wife, April. It's why our house stayed as pristine as it did. Dishes were never left in the sink. Clothes were never left on the floor. In the summer, I was working long days. My feet hit the floor every morning at 5:30 a.m. and I'd come back to the house around 6 p.m. That was my life. A lonely one, but a good one. April enjoyed it too. She was the kindest woman I knew. Truly. We met in high school back in Boston. It took years for her to come out of her shell, but one night we kissed, and the rest was history. Luckily, she found a job at a fabric store in town that paid okay. It kept her busy, and she seemed to like her coworkers enough. One simmering June evening, she set my dinner plate on the table and said, "A bizarre man stopped by the store today." That was the first time I remember hearing about them. April is not a judgmental woman whatsoever, so when she used the word bizarre, I knew there had to be something very off about this guy. She told me there was a man dressed in a red saffron-like robe, with no shoes. He had charcoal rubbed under his eyes and across his throat. She said her and her coworkers nearly gasped when he entered the store. Quickly, they found out he was mute, that would point rather than speak. "But he could hear you," I pried. "Yeah, I'm positive he could." She winced as she recalled the encounter. I could tell there was a lot going on between her ears. "Did he buy anything?" I asked. "Yeah," she responded. "All the red fabric we had." She seemed a bit shaken, so I did what I could to de-escalate her nerves. We wrapped up dinner and headed to bed soon after. The next day, I didn't think much of it. Summer was prime time for wheat harvesting, so I had much to do in those few months. It's what paid the bills. April made more than enough to help out, but it was the farming that guaranteed our living. We constantly stuffed money away in case the yield turned out bad, but it hadn't any of the first few years I lived here. Beginner's luck, I suppose. out in the field, I thought a lot about my childhood in Boston. I wondered if the city's clutter and chaos paid to this fate of mine. I didn't regret the move now, but I wondered if I would someday. How maybe my attitude might change. I had a rebellious nature about me. I grew up in a Catholic house, so most of what I did was under a microscope. My parents were hard on me, and breaking the rules would prove to be very harsh. Over time, I felt like I couldn't do anything right. I felt like I was playing a game that was impossible to win. It's why I promised myself if things lined up just right and the time came, I wouldn't hesitate to set up shop somewhere far away. So, that's what I did. Less than a week later, I was driving my combine harvester, thinking about that exact topic. As I spun the wheel to take my final lap of the day, I faced the hill that towered over my plot from the west and saw two figures, their silhouettes carved into the sun behind them. The hill was really far away, so I couldn't quite make out what I was actually looking at. My rusty harvester continued west in what felt like slow motion, each yard providing a little more clarity. When I reached the edge of the plot, I parked the combine and the noise shuddered to silence. I jumped down from the wheel while plucking my earphones from my head and rounded out to the front of the vehicle. My sweaty hand saluted to shade my eyes from the calm sun, and I saw it. I saw the color red. The figures were people dressed in red robes that floated in the warm breeze. This was the first time I saw them. I took several steps for a closer look. Here, I could make out the shapes of their faces. I saw the outlines of their eyes and mouths. I saw the charcoal black rub beneath their eyes and striped across their throat. Just like April said, still, I didn't know what I was looking at. I could see they were facing me. They were watching me. My bumpy skin crawled, and the wind cut a bit colder. "Can I help you?" I yelled. It felt stupid, but I didn't know what else to say. Moments went by, and my arm was getting tired. I wanted to get back to work, but I didn't feel comfortable turning cheek to these guys. The two didn't feel unthreatening. Marching up the hill for a confrontation didn't feel like an option, so I stopped thinking about it. Suddenly, they both pointed towards me. I looked over my shoulders, and a panic spiraled in my chest. They were pointed at me, right at me. When I got ready to call them again, they began to move backward. I squinted my eyes to focus, and one step at a time, their bodies and shaved heads faced beneath the top of the hill. I didn't tell April because I didn't see why it would be necessary. However, I packed a pistol at the top of my closet below some old raggedy clothes in case they got any ideas. I bought the gun right when I found out about the town's policing situation. Calling the police here was useless. In the rare instances a real crime actually happened, it usually got handed off to the State Department. The fact that our town was a natural cul-de-sac didn't do any favors. We were surrounded by a steep mountain range that was virtually unhikeable. To get to Dupree, you had to stroll down the narrow 212 interstate. One way in, one way out. The road made things miserable if there was a wreck. There wasn't even enough space to peel around the traffic. The road's edges declined into a steep hill on both sides. So steep that your car would tumble over if you tried to drive against the hill. Several half-wits did this, and the town had to put up a sign that told drivers to stay on the road. Any person with any thought would know not to even try it. But stupid people did stupid things. And stupid is what these police were in charge of. No Sherlock work, no shoot-offs, no drug busts, just the occasional wreck and cat in a tree. Over the next few days, I sort of forgot about the farm incident. I went about my business and took care of my chores. I figured I might do something nice for April and bring her lunch. So I packed up some chopped contents from the refrigerator and headed to the fabric store. It was a long way, but we needed a trip to the grocery store anyways. April was so happy to see me. We shared a moment, and I was glad to take her away from her work, even if it was for a short time. I made my way to the grocery store, but when I stepped inside, the building was practically empty. The red-robed men were funneling in and out with handfuls of everything: food, drinks, supplies, even toilet paper. Their bare feet muttered in a blur. They were moving so fast, so urgently, while none of them said a word. Most were crowded and the only two checkout aisles available. The two clerks scanned their items and loaded their bags with apprehensive looks. There were nearly 40 of them at a time. After they passed the register, they handed down a single credit card that bounced back and forth between each checkout line. And when a few would exit, a few more would enter to replace them. They weren't loading the bags anywhere when they checked out. They walked outside and stepped down the sidewalk, bare feet pattering on the stiff concrete. I peeked down the bare aisles, looking for anyone else that was witnessing the circus. The only other people in the store were an elderly couple in the same produce section, but they were far too old to give a crap about anything. My fingers fumbled through my pockets in search of my phone. I was ready to call the police, but then I realized, what would I even say? Strange-looking men were frantically buying groceries. They wouldn't even show up for something like that. The store, my farm, now this. I stood by the sliding door, watching these men pour out of the store, each one looking into my eyes as they walked out of the building, each one making me more and more nervous. Their eyes were glazed over, and the moisture of their sweat sprawled out of the charcoal around their eyes. They were all skinny, very skinny. They were different heights and skin colors, but they were in uniform, a red uniform, and they moved as one. My thinking was getting closer to fight or flight. I called April in a panic. I told her to get off work right that moment. She said she couldn't leave, and I told her it didn't matter if she got fired. I told her she needed to be waiting outside in the next few minutes, and that it was a matter of her safety. I found my car and raced over to her store. She was waiting outside like I told her. She jumped in the passenger, and I hustled home. April asked what was going on, and I told her we'd talk about it when we got home. I needed to focus on the road. It may have been an overreaction, but at the time, it didn't feel like that. There was something dangerous about those people, something unpredictable. Whatever they were planning for, I didn't want to be a part of it. I told April what happened, and she calmed me down a little when we got home. We decided to stay at her grandparents' place until this whole thing was solved. Her grandmother, Mammy, and grandfather, Pop, only lived about 3 hours north in a town called Bismarck, North Dakota. Most of her immediate family lived in the area. It was one of the bigger reasons why we left Boston and moved here. We took about 20 minutes to pack what we needed, then got back on the road and headed over. I didn't tell her grandparents what I saw at the grocery store, and neither did April. What were they going to do anyways? I don't think April even knew what she was hearing when I told her. We framed the visit as getting out of town for a breath of fresh air. I guess it was true in a way. Mammy and Pop were overjoyed, but my mind was everything but clear. Eventually, I had to excuse myself to think things over. I gave them a pathetic excuse that I was sick and retreated upstairs to the guest bedroom. I played everything in my head over and over again. April came up to check on me. I slipped myself in bed and closed my eyes. I was exhausted. I slept hours past my usual work hour. It was Friday morning. Feeling better than the day before, I shuffled downstairs and brewed myself a cup of coffee. Mammy and Pop weren't there, which surprised me. I didn't think they had jobs, but I didn't really know. April was snuggled up on the living room sofa, watching some awful show. I cuddled up next to her, and we spent the afternoon relaxing. We decided to stay the weekend. I hesitantly called the DPD to communicate my suspicion about the recent days. I told them about the fabric store, the grocery store, and about my visitors at the farm. The officer on the line was a kind young man who took my complaint without making me feel like a total lunatic. He said he'd spend the day downtown and see what he could do. It made me feel a lot better. I hung up the phone with some much-needed optimism. On Saturday, April made a call to her store, and everything seemed to be okay, which was great to hear, but it made me feel so dramatic. At the groceries, it seemed like we were in immediate danger, or would be soon, but perhaps I was wrong. April understood my angst, but not fully. I just wanted to protect her. I apologized to her for making her leave her job, but she deflected it like the angel she was. Maybe I misread things. Maybe the Hushmen were in some movement, and maybe they just needed groceries. The next day, we figured our welcome was worn. We hugged Mammy and Pop goodbye and loaded up the car. The sun doused over the horizon, and whatever or whoever was responsible for nature's creation seemed to be patting me over the head, ensuring me that I shouldn't fear, ensuring me that I was in good hands. We rolled up to the lip of the town, and as we cruised through its center, we saw not a single person. Unusual, even on a Sunday evening. Perhaps at this point I was too alert for my own good. Besides, I didn't want to provoke unwarranted fear like I did earlier. Half an hour later, we were nearing our home. By this time, the sun had fled us, and we were alone. My rubber tires crackled over our rocky driveway. I unhatched the back of the car and lifted the straps of luggage over my shoulder as April made her way to the front. It was then that I heard it. A sound I will never forget. April's blood-curdling cries, raptured to the night's stagnates. "Ah!" she screamed. No, no, no! Paul! 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 I shed the luggage and sprinted to April as fast as I could. She covered her mouth with both hands as tears streamed over her fingers. Her chest hiccuped in a sob. Below, the brilliance of the porch light, crimson blood stretched across the top of the door frame. My chest caved in and my stomach squeezed. A lump the size of a bowling ball rested in my throat, and my pupils grew as large as a jungle cat's. This was my home. Someone did this to my home. I clutched the brass handle, ready for whatever lied on the other side. And in that moment, I did not fear death. April's screams bent around my ears like gravity. I could hear nothing. Go to the car, I said. She scurried away. My suspicions, my fears, they were coming to life. Boosh! I shot through the front door, frantically twisting my head in every direction in the darkness of the house. I bolted towards my room, then struggled rounds into a magazine. I slapped the mag in the pistol and made my way back to the living room. Heavy breaths gushed from my nose as I stared through the glimmering iron sights. I directed the barrel around the corner, seeing if I could track anything in the black. My left hand escaped the grip and flipped on the light switch. I squinted as the brash light impaired my vision. My sight refocused, and that same haunting color poured into my perception. Red. Thousands of dried blood footprints scattered all over the floor. I could hardly see the carpet beneath it. The blood's metallic odor silvered into my nose, and I wondered whose it was, animal or human. I didn't know. My adrenaline was digesting to fear, and my hands began to shake uncontrollably, peering around corner after corner, barging through door after door. I found nothing besides more blood, as if buckets of it had been chucked on everything. The walls, the furniture, the counters. Nothing was stolen besides our food and drink. I walked outside and beckoned to April. She ran from the passenger and wrapped her slim arms around me. I hugged back. Her chest pulsed in a weep, and her warmth soothed my nerves. We walked inside. April nearly collapsed in devastation. I held her tight and wove my fingers through her dark hair as she cried. I told her everything would be okay. We sat there for a while, holding each other, and not a thought crossed my mind. I was blank. I was tired. I was weak. A bitter taste emerged at the back of my throat, and finally, I came back to my senses. I picked up my phone and dialed the police, but my service was gone. My panic found new life. I began to ring anyone I knew, but every time I hit call, it returned with 3 boops, then quiet. April sensed my uneasiness, my dread. She watched as I hopelessly troubleshot my phone, trying anything and everything to get a connection. She tried her phone, but nothing. The feeling in my chest crept back from its shadow. I could feel it again. April's swelled eyes and stuffy nose began to clear up. We needed a solution, and quickly. We gave up on the internet connection and brainstormed. We need to go back to Bismarck, April suggested. I agreed. Suddenly, as we made our way to the door, boom! All the lights, all the electricity tapped out. Darkness shuddered over us. I couldn't even see my own feet. April yelped, and I was speechless. The buzz in the walls faded to silence. In the stillness, then, I heard it from the door. Knock, knock, knock.